and seismic risk is basically the consequence of this. This is always in terms of only the money or the deaths. So the probability of occurrence of consequences in terms of deaths and money is the seismic risk. So that we should not use seismic hazard and seismic risk interchangeably. To clarify, seismic risk is the convolution of hazard with vulnerability and the exposure. Vulnerability, to understand, is a damageability. How much damage can be there? How vulnerable is the building? So this lecture webinar is about the hazard part only and not the vulnerability. Then what is disaster? Disaster is nothing but a risk above some threshold, where the government machineries, they start working. So if the risk is more than some threshold value, then we declare that as disaster. So we should use seismic hazard, seismic vulnerability, seismic risk, and disaster. They are having the definite definitions. Now, seismic hazard assessment, as usual, can be carried out using deterministic or probabilistic approach. There is a lot of debate about this, which method should be used. I will just conclude in the last that both the methods are required. Therefore, you should concentrate on both the methods. Now, before I go to the method, there is some basic requirement for both kind of hazard assessment. And that data is basically the geological setup, the geophysical anomalies, the tectonic setup, and the seismicity. Now, on the screen, I've given a figure, very simple figure, that's the homogeneous cube. Now, if you apply the stresses, then you can very well define the cracks on this homogeneous cube based on the Griffith theory or some other. We know how the cracks will develop. But when we are constantly applying it number of times, so at n number of times, there will be lot of cracks, and you can see the cube here. I have not made a lot of cracks, but some of the cracks. Now, if I apply now the next cycle of the stresses, then what will happen? The preferential location where the stress will be released will be this thick line. That is the biggest crack on this. And similar cases of the earth. From time immemorials, the dynamic earth, the plate tectonics is working, the forces are being applied, and now we are having a lot of cracks in terms of faults. We know geological faults. So when next force is applied, the preferential location will be that fault. So the first exercise of seismic hazard estimation is to look for the faults. And to look for the faults, what we do? We see the geological setup. Because on the surface, if the geology is different at a place, there will be a discontinuity. And if there is any motion along that discontinuity, we call this as fault. Now, this is on the surface. Then we go to the third dimension, the depth. And in the depth, to see if there is any discontinuity, we take help of geophysical anomalies. If there is a change in gravity value, if there is change in conductivity, resistivity, if there is change in magnetic properties. So all those changes, they ultimately gives you the idea that there is a discontinuity. So we must see around your side the geological setup, the geophysical setup. Now, tectonic setup, tectonics, it's a Greek word, means force. How many forces, how much forces are being applied in that area? And then the seismicity. Seismicity is nothing but the occurrence of the earthquakes. So based on the geological and geophysical anomalies, you find the faults, which are the preferential locations to give the energy out of the system. Then tectonics is the forces which are applying in the area, and then the seismicity, which is the result of this. Then you do the reverse exercise. You try to associate the seismicity with the existing faults. And that exercise, when you combine these two, that is called as seismotectonic modeling. So first thing is to carry out the seismotectonic modeling in the area. And that for that, what you have to do is you have to go for the active sources, which you call as seismogenic sources, and then you associate the seismicity, and that model, now you have that these are the seismogenic sources from which we will be considering them to estimate the force in terms of acceleration or displacement or velocity at the point of interest. Now, because everything else is qualitative, like the geology, like the faults. I mean, they are large enough, but the seismicity, it's a quantitative data. And you know that when we are using the seismic data, we will be using a lot of statistics, a lot of probability, then and you know from 12th class statistics and probability, that the data should be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So for that, to make that, we do the homogeneity of data, we do the declustering of data, we see the completeness of the data. So now I will start little bit into the seismic hazard assessment exercise. So the first is the spatial coverage. Now, at the site, you want to know the forces which will affect your structure. Now you take the highest structure. Now, nowadays it is the Burj Khalifa. Now, what is the period of that, and what is the period of the ground motion which will be coming to you? So the large earthquake, you know, they generate lower frequencies, and lower frequencies they reach far, the larger distances. So as per the codal practices, because it's given in the codes also, we take around 300 kilometers as the spatial extent of the area. Now this 300 kilometer means that any large earthquake, possible large earthquake happening inside the earth will be generating the forces or the ground motion which will affect our building, and farther to that, that is not of our interest for structural engineering. Now the temporal coverage, you know, we should have the data from the history, we should have the data from the paleoseismicity, we should have the data from earlier times to the recent times. Now homogeneity in size is basically to change all the magnitudes to the similar scale. As a seismologist, these I love these different scales, because they give me the energy content in different frequency bands. Like ML, it's good for short frequencies. The MS, it is good for the large frequencies, because it contains so the energy, because I cannot record the whole data in one window. So I have different windows of these instruments, and when I go for the magnitude assessment, then those windows they affect it, and therefore there are different magnitudes. But for this exercise, to put them on a same scale, what we do, we try to change the scales to a single scale, and most of the time, either it is the moment magnitude, which is more closer to seismologists, or it is a surface magnitude, which is more closer to the engineers because of their inherent properties. Sometimes we do the linear exercise. Linearly, we have the regression line between local magnitude and surface wave magnitude, and then we change it. And most of the time nowadays, we are doing bivariate orthogonal regression analysis, in which we consider the error in both the axes. That is the error in ML as well as the error in MS. So this homogenization is one of the necessary exercises. Then we do the declustering. Declustering is basically the process which is guaranteeing you that you have now the data which is mutually exclusive. Therefore, independent events, they are filtered out of this and have only the main jobs. You decluster. Professor Srivalsa. Muted now. Okay. So window methods are very popular to do the declustering. Where what you do, you take an event, and from that event you see the time and the distance and the magnitude. If it falls in that category, then you delete it and consider that as the aftershock or the foreshock. So this is also one of the exercises which is compulsory. Then we do the completeness step. I love steps method because it is a very simple method where you divide the whole data into different classes and temporally into different periods, and then see whether the data is behaving as stationary data. Means that the statistical parameters are not changing time. So for example, you divide the data into 10 years cumulatively, 10 years period, and then see how the mean of that is changing or the standard deviation of that is changing. And wherever there is a break, it means that the data is not complete in that cycle. And then you go for that, and then you define that this magnitude range is only complete for last 20 years or 30 years. Most of the time, the seismic hazard analysts, they do this exercise and leave it as it is. Please don't do that. Carry forward this database to further analysis and use only that complete database for carrying out your hazard parameter assessments. Next is the minimum magnitude, MC. So if you see this yellow figure, I've just plotted the magnitudes with respect to time. And then you see suddenly after 1998, lower magnitudes they are given. So this data is complete for magnitude 2, and this data is complete for magnitude 4.2. It is a simple eye-fitting method by which you can see and you can take the complete data for your analysis. The above figure is based on GR relationship. You see the line, you just fit the data and try to start cutting the data from the lower side. So first you take magnitude 2 as the complete, then the line will have more residuals. Then you go for further, and then you will suddenly see that around some magnitude the line is fitting well, and after that it is increasing. So the lowest point will give you the MC value. These are the simple exercises. I'll go for more complex one when I'm doing the probabilistic approach. Now, there are 4 steps, you know. First is identification. You have identified, then you have characterized. In characterization, you go for the active faults, and then you can consider them as point source, line source, aerial source, or volume source. The much required thing is how to put the maximum potential earthquake for that, which is the maximum probable earthquake. Also, we call that MPE. There are 3-4 methods given for that. A simple method is you increase in the last maximum observed, you add 0.5 or 0.75 or 0.25 based on your perception of risk. Say, for example, for dams, we add 0.5. For nuclear power plants, we add 0.75. Now, what that really means? That really means is that if statistically you can change the axis of the time with the magnitude. Now, we cannot go back in the time, but we can increase the magnitude. So it was seen statistically in some of the papers that increasing the maximum observed by 0.5 means going back into 500 years or so. But since in nuclear power plants, you require the MCE to be 10,000 years or so. So what you do, you increase it a little bit more. So by 0.75 means that going more into the past. So you have now the more data with you. Similarly, you very well know that larger the fault, larger will be the magnitude. So there are empirical relationships available with the length, width, area, with magnitude. And then you can calculate the magnitude from this. Most of the relationships which were given in past, they were inconsistent. So people were facing the problem that while working out the magnitude from length, was okay, but when you work out the length from the magnitude, it was coming different because the relationships were inconsistent. So what you can do, you can use nowadays the consistent relationships where the independent and dependent parameters have no meaning because they are consistent. So you can go from length, width to area and then calculate the magnitude, or you can go from length to magnitude or magnitude to length. So the results will be same. So I strongly recommend that while doing this exercise, you must consider the consistent uh, empirical relationships, which are the scaling laws. We call them the consistent scaling laws, if you want to find out from this. Slip methods, they are mostly not used because you don't know really the slip in the area. Basically, that is the moment rate, which you calculate, and from that you work out the maximum magnitude. Or you can use the Gutenberg-Richter relationship, in which you just extend the right bottom of the curve to go for 2,500 years or 5,000 years or 10,000 years, and see on the y-axis the value of magnitude. And because we are always conservative now in deterministic, the problem is that we are conservative at all the steps, and therefore we are always increasing it. Here also you are conservative, and conservatism is inbuilt here, because what you do, you take the maximum of all the four values as your maximum potential earthquake. Then source to site distance. Everybody knows. I'm not going into a lot of discussions into this. There are various definitions. The Joyner-Bohr distance is most of the time used. Nowadays, people are using the R rupture, or R seismogenic depth, or R hypocentral, or wherever the maximum energy release is there. So for the classical approaches, RGB and R rupture and R hypo, they are sufficient. But what you have to do is you should use the same distance definition as given by the attenuation relationships, because there it is used. Then you come to the controlling earthquake, which is just the maximum of the ground motion from any of the sites. So I have taken three type of sites, so source A, B, and C, and this is the hazard, which is a function of magnitude and distance. So I mean, just to simplify the things at this juncture, and the maximum of this ground motion, whichever it's given, that's called as the controlling earthquake. And based on the controlling earthquake, you define. So the outcome of the deterministic seismic hazard assessment is only that the MCE value, maximum credible earthquake, is, or maximum considered earthquake, is magnitude M at a distance D, giving you a ground motion in terms of PGA, or in terms of PGV, or in terms of PGD. And so basically what we are doing is we are generating a seismic scenario based on the deterministic hazard assessment for a specified location. That is the worst case ground motion. Here we do not consider any uncertainty in the location or the size or the time, and therefore most of the time, the DSHA values are conservative and uneconomical. But the advantage of this is that you know that we have very less data for last 100 years or so, the seismicity data, and we are giving the probabilities for probabilities of accidents for last 500 years, 2500 years, or 10,000 years, for which most of the time the PSHA they fail. And therefore, what we need is a capping value. And that capping value is always coming from DSHA. So when you are carrying out the seismic hazard assessment, both the hazard assessment approaches are required. For capping value, you are banking on deterministic seismic hazard assessment, because here you have the control for the data in the past. But in PSHA, you are more closer to design basis earthquakes, where you talk of 100 years or 225 years or 475 years at the most. So the limitations, I'll talk now of DSHA, that the predicted median response of two earthquakes may differ because of the period of interest nowadays. Faults near the site, they are not obvious, and we are over conservative. Sometimes we take the mean plus sigma kind of thing for this, but still 16% chances are more to exceed this. And so therefore we are not really considering the worst case. And these are the outputs. We give the standard curves, and then we give the strong motion time history based on the spectrum compatible time history. Now the probabilistic, I think I have to be a little fast now. Probabilistic seismic hazard assessment, basically it is a framework to include all the uncertainties. Unlike the scenario like, it gives you, it considered all the possible cases of magnitudes, of the sources, of the distances, of all the uncertainties from the ground motion prediction equations. And then it gives you the probability of accidents. Now, this is a very famous figure. Here I will talk of the uncertainties. You can have the uncertainties in the geometry of the sources. You can have the uncertainties in the A and B values. That is the size uncertainty. You can have the uncertainty into the ground motion. And all these uncertainties, they work together, and then you use the total probability theorem to work out the probability of accidents. And this is the ultimate result of probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. Most of the people, they think that probability, 2% probability of accidents or the ground motion or anything else, they are the results of probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. Please be clear that this figure, last one, probability of accidents versus the ground motion, that is the only outcome of PSHA. Rest of the things we are doing later. Okay. Then if we talk of the hazard uncertainties, we start with the magnitude scale, we start with the catalog incompleteness, then the sources, then the recurrence models, then the ground motion models. Now to compile them and use them in PSHA framework, what we do, we define the two types of uncertainties, that is the aleatory and the epistemic. Aleatories, they are basic probabilistic uncertainties. People may be knowing, those who use mathematics, they know these uncertainties by probabilistic uncertainty and statistical uncertainty. This aleatory uncertainty is a natural unpredictable variation in the system. You cannot reduce it. It will remain always. You toss a coin, there is a 50% probability of coming tail or head. You increase the number of times, you will get the same. So here, the knowledge of experts cannot help it, and this is as it is. but that has to be included so that we can include it into the ultimate probability of accidents. Epistemic is the one which is because of the models. You are using some other ground motion prediction equation, I am using some other. You are saying that it is an aerial source, I am saying it is a volume source. Somebody is taking A and B values simply from GR relationship. Somebody is doing a lot of complex analysis for that. So ultimately what we do, we use logic tree. So epistemic uncertainties are basic inputs to the logic tree, and the logic tree starts from only the epistemic uncertainties. Here I have told you that bivariate orthogonal analysis we have to do. Now here we talk of the uncertainties which are to be included here. There it was only the magnitude which was to be used, and the magnitude means magnitude 8.1. But here 8.1 plus minus something, or what is the confidence level, or what is the R value. So they are all used now in PSH. Then the spatial uncertainty, you have to make the PDFs and CDFs. I have taken this simple figure from Kramer. So you have to make the PDFs and CDFs and combine them together. Then the size uncertainty, we are taking from recurrence law. You can use unbounded, the simple one. You can use the lower bounded if you know MC value. You can use the bound from both the sides if you know the MX value. Okay, so and you can calculate the uncertainties into this. Then because of the epistemic uncertainties, you can use many types of methods. Many methods are available to calculate A, B, and MC. And why I am saying this is because, you know, we have the seismicity data, we have the geological data, we have done the seismotectonic modeling. Now after that, A, B, MC, and MX. After that, we forget everything about the area. And these are the only 4 parameters which remains with us, and we do rest of the calculations. So the bridge between the physics, real physics, and our calculations is these 4 parameters. So I strongly recommend to my students that please consider your 60%, at least 60% efforts of the total seismic hazard assessment in estimating A, B, MC, and MX values and the uncertainties in those. Similarly for MX value, Kitchko and Graham and Sullivan, they gave very nice method. I'm not going into the method itself because I have to cover a lot. You can consider both types of data, complete, catalog part, and extreme also, to calculate these values. Now, the main equation for this, everybody knows this, that all the sources and their rates of recurrence are considered, and then you consider and weight them using the conditional probability of occurrence using ground motion prediction equations. Then you consider the size uncertainty and the distance uncertainty, and this lambda value, that is the mean exceedance value, is the only output, which is the annual mean exceedance of some ground motion from this, and rest of the things we apply later. So now I'm coming to the outputs we require from this figure. Okay, so now I have I'm closing this classical methods, and now I'm coming to the rest of the things. So the temporal uncertainties we call, or the temporal recurrence model, 99% of the time we are considering Poissonian model. Now this Poissonian model is very simple. Probability of n equal to n is lambda t to the power n e to the power minus lambda t divided by factorial n, and here that is the mean value, and we are most of the time interested in the probability of at least one event, which is 1 minus e to the power minus lambda t. This equation, probability of n greater than equal to 1 and e to the power minus lambda t, and the worked out GR relationship, they are almost the 70% of the total work. Rest of the things we are doing based on that. Now, this is the same equation which I have given you, written in different methods. And this equation is giving me the idea how I will be reconciling the results from DSHA and PSHA. So, for example, this is giving me the probability of accidents in 50 years. Say for example, in 50 years, 2% probability of accidents is equivalent to 2475 of the years of the return period. So now, DSHA, we are working with the return periods, and PSHA, we are working with the accidents values. So these are the, now the engineers and the seismologists, they both come together to work out what maximum credible earthquake we should define and what design basis earthquake we should define. These definitions, they are given by both seismologists as well as structural engineers. For example, MCE and DB. For a seismologist, MCE is the maximum potential earthquake which can ever occur. Design basis earthquake is the one which is that earthquake which can occur during the lifetime of the structure. This is a definition more closer to seismology. But the earthquake engineers, earthquake design engineers, they define it in terms of the damages or in terms of the working of the, that is more clear with the safe shutdown earthquake for nuclear power plants and operation basis earthquake. They are, I mean, self-explanatory terms which the structural engineers can do. So we can compare these results based on the return periods and probability of incidence. And most of the time, the MCE value for large dams, because Professor Sitaram gave me this idea to give the examples of the large dams. So for large dams, MCE is generally 2% accidents in 50 years for from point of view of PSHA, and 2500 years of the return period for DSHA. Similarly, for DBE, it is 10% and sometimes 20% when you take other structures also. And there it is the half of the MC. Or sometimes we give the results in terms of standard deviations. Here the people, they are sometimes confused between the MCE value given in terms of mean and means plus sigma or 2% accidents. They are two different things, and you compare them to go for the design. So therefore, sometimes nowadays we consider from DSHA the mean plus sigma as the MC and mean as the DBE value. Now, many of the people, they ask whether it is a mean or the median. Let me make it very clear. Most of the time, it is the logarithmic of the ground motion. Now, it is the logarithmic of the ground motion. So the mean value of the logarithmic of the ground motion is, in the simple terms, is the median value in the linear scale. And therefore, sometimes we call it as the median value, and sometimes we call it as the mean value, mean and median. Now, one of the other products is the seismic hazard curve, which is the uniform hazard curves. So what we do, we take the probability of accidents of all the ground motions at all the periods of the spectra, and then we join it. So this spectra is basically having all the periods which are having the equal probability of accident, that is the 10% in 50 years. Then this is the example of giving this for the other kind of local sites. So for say class D or class B or class A, sometimes some of the codes nowadays the ground motion prediction equations are well established after this 2014 and GA2. You directly take it from there, and most of the time the geotechnical engineers, they do the proper wave propagation analysis, 1D or 2D or 3D, even from going from the base rock to the surface. So the uniform hazard spectrum, it is developed from probabilistic analysis. All the ordinates have equal probability of accidents. So it represents all kinds of small and large distance earthquake. This is the advantage, and this is also one of the disadvantage of the UHS. Advantage because it is considering all of them. Disadvantage is because when you are converting it to the ground motion time history, there is no ground motion time history which is capable of replicating it in time domain, because it is considering, it is the envelope of all of them. And I'll come to this while giving the more advanced things. Now I'll take now 5 minutes to go to the seismic hazard site. Now this is a site, and I'm thankful to Central Water Commission. This is developed under DRIP project of World Bank, and in this what we have done is, I'm going a little fast. On the map, on a dynamic map, we have placed all the geology of the which is given from the seismotectonic of GSI, and along with this this okay, can we go there? Okay, I have to little shorten my screen because nothing was coming out there. So then we can plot the seismicity. So these are the earthquakes given by IMD. We can plot the seismic zoning map. We can plot the tectonics on this, and these are basically the inputs. And this was done for the dams in South India. And you know that we are fortunate enough to have so many dams in South India. There are lots and lots of dams, and we have more than 5,000 large dams in India. So now I'll come to the hazard calculation. This hazard calculation can be done deterministically, where you can go for the attenuation relationship, we can go for the site type, and this can be done for PSHA also. And because the time is less, I'll go for the both of them together. So now what you can do, you can go to any site, and then you just click at that site and then select the attenuation relationship. So this gives you the latitude, longitude of that site. Now you can change it here also. So if you know the latitude, longitude of your site, you can place it here. Now, based on this, this will calculate all the faults near to this, and based on this ground motion prediction equation, it will give you the PGA. And you know, we have considered the ground motion that controlling earthquake. This earthquake you can now go for editing. You know that the distance from the site is say 25 kilometers, so you can give 25 kilometers, and whatever you can give, and then you can go with this. So this, only the controlling earthquake will be used, and it will give you the response spectra for the MC value, which is 2480 years, and 475 years response spectra for dB value. It will also give you the PSHA and DSHA MC values and the alpha values, which are required by the engineers. Then you can generate the design spectra. The difference in design spectra is only that you control the acceleration, displacement, and velocity in their own periods. And then it gives you the DSHA, PSHA, and the IS code on all these things. And then based on the guidelines provided by the National Committee for large dams, it reconciles it. And then it gives you the recommended design spectrum. And based for different dampings which were asked. And for these dampings, now it will generate the time history for 5% damping value. So this, it takes some time. We have to wait. So this site is basically developed for Central Water Commission. There they are using it for their dams, because there are lots of dams, and basically for rehabilitation of dams. And once they clear it, then everybody can use it for any purpose in South India. I think it is getting a lot of time. I can wait for another 20 seconds or so, then if it is coming, otherwise I will not wait here. But it is working, I know. Yes. So now this is the time history which it has generated for this. So these are now the simple ones. So I again come to now the now we go a little bit advanced one. So we do the deaggregation exercise where we try to find the magnitude distance combinations which are contributing as the largest value to our base ground motion. Then we use the logic tree. Everybody knows this. Now the requirements, basically I want to take around 10 to 15 minutes on this. The requirements are the seismic hazard input parameters, which should be defendable and tenable. The ground motion prediction equations. Everybody asks which one to be used. The local site conditions, how they should be used, whether they should be used along with the ground motion prediction equation, or with the geotechnical engineers, they use it, or we use the factors. Then a lot of debate is always there between deterministic and probabilistic. Then the occurrence models, then the MCE and DB values, then mean median or the probability of accidents, uniform hazard spectra, conditional mean spectra. Now that is nowadays required by many of the high buildings. Then the ground motion times. There are many methods and many models which are available, including the two methods for GR relationship. Basically, the constant seismicity and constant moment rate. People, they most of the time. Most of the time they are using only constant seismicity and not constant moment rate. I'll give you one of the examples from Himalayas where the ground motion is coming differently for these two models. And then there are non-Poisson models and all that. So this you can see on this. Now let me give you the example from this Himalayas. There is a northwest source. There is Garhwal Himalaya source and Nepal. Now these all sources, they have a differential moment. All tectonics is not working together, and they have different characteristics, local characteristics. The faults are behaving differently. So what we have done is we have tried to find the constant seismicity model and moment rate constant recurrence model. These are the two models. Now in one, what we are doing, we are just increasing it, and the GR relationship just changes here. But constant moment means that this moment has to be adjusted with the number of earthquakes in this category. So when the moment is higher, then there must be lower number of these earthquakes. So therefore, based on this, when we apply this, so the constant seismicity model and constant rate moment release models, they give mean annual recurrence for north west region like this. And when we try for the years with the probability of occurrence, then this. So this is also one of the advanced things which we must think for Himalayas, where we are just going with the simple GR relationship. Then the GMPs. GMPs, Campbell gave in 1980, then Douglas, he did a very good review for that. Then the NGA models, they came up, NGA model, first one that came up in 2008. Everybody knows these are the parameters. Then the next came in 2014. So where are we going from magnitude distance to fault local site effects, and then the deep soils, local site effects, and now we are also considering the near field effects. Output side, we were having only the peak values, then we went to spectral values, and now period dependent. And this period dependent and near field effect, they are the basic requirements. We cannot do it using the classical approach, and we have to give them these things. These are the simple definitions of the ground. Now, when you are very near to the site, you have the near site effect in terms of directivity, in terms of directionality, in terms of the requirement for orthogonal sets for the dynasty. The directivity and directionality, they are the two different terms. Directivity is in terms of the ground motion. Directionality is in terms of the observer, because you know that these strong ground motion oscillographs, they are placed along the walls of the buildings because of the structural use, not in the northeast and south, north, south, and east west directions. So that is the directionality. Then the next directionality is on which side is your building, whether it is fault parallel or fault perpendicular, on which side, and therefore on every side we should go for the ground motion. Simply the near field is where the dimensions of the fault are very less than the source, and opposite to this, the governing features are mechanism, slip direction, location of the hypocenter. I'm thankful to Neha for giving me these slides today. I was thinking of giving this in one slide, but the near field ground motion, what are the characteristics? You have a very long period pulses. You have high PGA, PGV, PGA, or PGT, PGA ratios. Energy contained in a single or few pulses only. And sometimes the near field earthquakes lead to major permanent transformations of Earth. And the reasons are directivity effect, flinch step effect, and hanging wall effect. Directivity, as I have shown you, it is just the fault rupture, and whether you are in the forward direction or in the backward direction, so the fault effect will be there. So the characteristics are, if you are forward having forward activity, you have the large amplitudes and short durations, and when you are in the backward, you are having small amplitudes and long duration. Now, most of the time, when your structure is very near to the fault, you must know in which direction your building is there, so that you have some idea about the amplitude and the durations. This is the same thing which is written here. Then the flinch effect. Flinch effect is the difference is that forward directivity is a dynamic phenomena and two-sided velocity pulse is there, while the flinch effect is a static phenomena and one-sided velocity pulse. If you see the pulse in ground motion, they are synthesized. So the flinch is having a pulse like this, and forward directivity is having a pulse like this. So this you can see there. Then the hanging wall effect. If you are on the hanging wall, the motion will be more. Then on which side, these ground motion attenuation relationships now give you this in terms of alpha, in terms of Rx, in terms of RJB, in terms of R rupture. But you have to be very careful while selecting these, because selecting Rx, selecting alpha, selecting R rupture, and selecting RJB will give you the direction in which your site is there. So please make the geometry of this and then go for this. And ultimate effect you can see in the spectral acceleration. And these are the effects. So these are the effects which are there when we include these terms. So that is now very well understood. Which GMP should be used? I mean, you have to use the international one, and if you are using the functional form, that should consider desirable, including saturation with magnitude, magnitude dependent distance, scaling, and the terms which mimic the effects of inelastic attenuation. If there are multiple GMPs, you can use the epistemic uncertainties and the logic tree. Now, you know that the Poissonian process from which we are doing the classical approach, that is giving us the time independent hazard rate. Whatever is the hazard rate today in my area, if magnitude 7 occurs tomorrow, the hazard rate will be same. But that is not the case. Some of the energy is released, and I don't know whether that energy is partially released or not, whether there is more energy in the system, or now I should feel relief and the energy is released, and I'm free for next 40, 50 years. So for that, what we do is we make use of some of the non-Poissonian time-dependent uh, occurrence models. So Wibble, log normal, gamma, inverse Gaussian, they are very much used, but they were not physically interpreted. I'll give you one of the examples. For example, what we have done is, for these 4 zones, can you see these 4 zones? These 4 zones, we have taken the data and we have tried to fit the data for Wibble, gamma, inverse Gaussian, and log. And after fitting and looking at some of the approaches where you can match these, like Kolmogorov or other methods, we have tried which is best fitting. So say, for example, in Z1, which is this source, gamma is fitting. It means that in next 20 years, there may be some earthquake, and after that, it will be flat. In Nepal earthquake, for example, this is for the Nepal earthquake. Now, in Nepal earthquake, the data, I'm not saying this, the data set which is fitting is very near to the inverse Gaussian. And inverse Gaussian says on this day that the energy is released and you can relax. I mean, these are the interpretations, physical interpretations, which we can do using these. And these are not coming when we are considering the hazard rate to be constant. So these things should come in a dynamic system like Himalayas, where we should go for this. Then the conditional mean spectra. Here in conditional mean spectra, what I mean is that nowadays the time histories, they are required for a particular structure. Now, for example, this is one of the site for which this response spectra is given, and the codal values are given. This I have taken from Baker 2011. He has given very nice figures so that we can understand this. So now what we did for this spectra, we did the deaggregation. Now for that deaggregation, we got that there is a pair of magnitude 7.03 and distance 12.2 kilometers, which is giving us the maximum ground motion. Now, if we don't know the conditional mean spectra, what we will do is, if the client is asking for ground motion time history, we'll give compatible, spectrum compatible synthetic ground motion time history. If he is asking for the observed one or the recorded one, what we do, we give the magnitude 7 at 12.2 kilometers, search from the peer data or some other data, and give that time history. But if I plot the spectra for this, that is this. So this time history is only one part of the total spectra. You know that I've given you that the uniform hazard spectra is disadvantageous in this case. So now if I plot mean plus 2 sigma, which is very near to my this. So what I need is basically mean plus 2 sigma kind of time history and not this time history. So what he says is that for this spectra, go for all the time histories and select those time histories which are having the epsilon value, that is the mean plus standard deviation, which is near to this. So this blue one is the time history which is giving this, and I should select this. Now this is only for one period because the building was for one period. Sometimes the structural engineers, they put the whole spectra or the whole time history, and you should have the representative energy in those time histories. So what they want is a set of time histories and not a single time history. So for that, what we do is we select a period, we see the correlation factors. With the help of the correlation factors, we work out the epsilon for other periods and select the time history for those periods. So this is basically the mean spectra, conditional spectra, and these are the time histories which we should give with this spectrum. Then the another one is, I know most of us are geotechnical engineers, the local side effects. Not only the local side effects because of the soil, but the geometry also should be considered, because it can generate the surface waves, like in Mexico case. It can have the focused effect or defocusing effect. So not only the local side effects in terms of the soil, but in terms of the geometry also we should have. So these are some of the examples which we did, and I think there are 15 minutes left. This is one of the characteristic earthquake. This we did for Srinagar. So for Srinagar, these were the zones which we made. Then for all India level, we did this Poisson, Gaussian, and normal, and we see that the probabilities are really disturbed by that. We also applied the ANN kind of thing. We also applied the Gumbel 1, Gumbel 2, Gumbel 3 kind of thing. And then one of the things which I want to include here is the Monte Carlo simulations and all that. They are used for the sensitivity analysis. You see the parameter, you change the one parameter, you put all other parameters, you check the sensitivity. Or what you can do is individual statistical variations you consider when you consider it in the whole system, and then give the COV values. So these COV values along with the mean PGA map gives you the confidence level in using these, that okay, now I'm confident enough, this is the COV value, that much is the variation, and I can use this. This was given for the Delhi seismic microzoation, which was used there. So in the concluding remarks, I've not written anything. I just gave you that seismic hazard assessment is a very simple exercise, but it is really very complex from multidisciplinary point of view, from the data inputs, from the analysis methodology available, and nowadays because of the requirements of the end users. And these end users may be design engineers, maybe architects, maybe who are doing seismic microzoation, maybe who are doing the city planners. And with this, thank you very much, and I open it for the question and answers.
Thank you very much for this illuminating lecture, Professor Sharma. It was indeed a pleasure to hear from you some of the fundamentals. There are more than 360 participants in this particular webinar, and there are a large number of questions. But because of paucity of the time, we have selected a few questions. So I'll start with some of the questions. The first is, can you please elaborate on construction of design spectra, and please introduce what is conditional mean spectra?
Okay, design spectra, I've told you that the response spectra, what we get is very zigzag one. And so to smoothen that, people have given the approach of taking the spectral values at 0.2 second, and the 1 second and 2 second, and then you anchor these points and then use the time period variation and go for this. Physical meaning of this is that you are basically constraining the acceleration, the velocity and displacement in their own periods. So this is used by the engineers. One of the things sometimes asked is the capping value. So this capping value is for engineering perspective, because a single peak has no so much of energy which can really disturb the structure, and therefore we put a straight line over there. So this is how the design spectra is made. Conditional spectra is basically to go for conditioning the spectra based on the time histories which follow that spectra, specifically to those periods in which we are interested for our structure.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, which type of soil is subjected to higher ground motion in case of earthquake? And is it possible to include geological parameters in the calculations?
Soil types, you know, softer it is, higher will be the amplitudes. And I can understand this question and who has asked this question. Basically, it is, you know, the energy flux. When it is going from the higher velocity to the lower velocity, it is the flux is multiplication of the amplitude and the velocity. So once the velocity is going down, the amplitude should increase to conserve the energy and the energy flux. So lower the velocity, higher will be the amplitudes. And based on that, the amplification is done in using GMPs, using the 1D or 2D wave propagation, or using the factors. Now, the advanced thing which I want to invite your attention is that in earlier spectra given by the strong motion attenuation relationship, the softer soils, the spectra was going high, including the anchoring point most of the time. But you know the PGA value is independent of that, and now in NGA you can very well see this phenomena that even if you make the soil softer, the PGA is going down because of its inherent attenuation characteristics. So this is the main difference between the GMPs giving the earlier amplification factors and the GMPs now giving the amplification using them. Yes, please.
In the hazard parameters themselves, which are the approaches that will give a better estimation of the hazard parameters?
Hazard parameters, as I have already pointed out during the lecture, that these hazard parameters, we forget everything about the physics, about the seismicity and everything, and these 4 parameters remains with us. So, and since the logic tree approach is available to us, use as many methods you can, which you can justify, and try to work out the weights for these different methods. Do not ignore any of the methods, and please don't take a single method also. And one of the things, these hazard parameters, they can be rechecked from the data itself. You take the GR relationship, you work out the magnitude, say for 6, you find the return period, you go back to the your Excel sheet, see if it is 100 years, see how many times it is recurring, and if that recurrence period is matching with your calculations, then it's okay. It's a simple check.
Now there are a number of questions on the seismichazard.in website. I have collected some of them. So first is, can we get time history table from the website for analysis of structure?
Sure, sure. It is giving you the spectra at around 100 values. It is giving you the digital time history, and it is giving you the full report which you can have for your site, including everything.
Okay, then which data of the earthquake is used in the website?
Uh, because we have to be guided by the National Committee on Design Earthquake Parameters, which is the Central Water Commission Committee. From that committee, we were given the directions to use the geological and geophysical and all data that is from Seismotectonic Atlas, and the data on earthquakes was certified and given by IMT.
And for the ocean engineer, how applicable is this website model at offshore sites?
For offshore sites, this can be used. There's no problem, and you can have the data on the surface of the earth below water. And then what you require is basically the geotechnical engineering based on the bathymetry and based on the local soil conditions. I always recommend. We did some work for offshore projects near South India, where we did the actual propagation, wave propagation, after using the PSHA at the bedrock.
The next question is again on the website only. How does the calculation takes into account the local soil properties while carrying out the computations based on either DSHA or PSHA?
Only it is in terms of the site classification, ABCD. We have given the ranges for VS. That's only what we can do. Otherwise, you go for the base route and do the wave propagation.
Okay, and next question, though you have already answered this, but it is the spectral acceleration values from the website, are they at bedrock level or ground level?
And it depends on what conditions we have provided.
Yeah. Can we obtain the seismicity of individual fault computed from the region, like 300 kilometers around a particular site?
From this site? This is a good idea, I think, because I've never thought that a seismicity will be one of the outputs from this site. This we can think and place it. I mean, the question is for basically for a buffer zone around some fault, whether we can go for that. But for that, I'll recommend one of the good software. That's the JetMap. You can do a lot of work in JetMap and play with the seismicity, and it says play with the seismicity.
Okay, the next question then is on ZMAP software tool itself. We use the ZMAP software tool for declustering process.
Sure, you can use that, no problem.
Okay. Next question is, do we need the reassessment of site-specific PJ values for structures which are built years before, like for example, dams?
Yes, there are two reasons for that. One is sometimes because of the latest seismicity, it may have changed, and the other is nowadays the change in the philosophy of earthquake design engineers. There is some changes in the type of spectra and the type of factors which are given. So if you are now redesigning it or doing analysis using the present day philosophy, you sometimes require those parameters which are not given earlier. So for that, you have to go for that.
Okay, the next one is again related to the zones and the zone factors, that how conservative they are and how they have been arrived at. For example, in zone 4, how it is taken as 0.36 G.
They are the factors which are the average factors. They are not the capping values. And they were given by the Bureau of Indian Standards. And they were worked out earlier using almost the deterministic seismic hazard assessment and not the probabilistic one. And at BIS level, we are going for the probabilistic seismic hazard assessment work. Some of the work is recommended for the use. It is the BIS which is working on that. But they were mostly the deterministic values.
Then what will be the ideal engineering demand parameters to assess building performance level as far as performance-based seismic design is concerned?
You have to go for the conditional mean spectra. To go for the conditional mean spectra and a set of time histories.
Okay, and again a similar question. The frequency content of earthquakes are most damaging parameters. So can we get some approximate frequency of an earthquake for a particular area so that structures can be designed to avoid resonating frequencies?
It's really a difficult question to answer. I mean, not to understand, but you know, you never know the distance and the magnitude of the earthquake. The frequency content in the time series, it is based on the magnitude and the distance pair. Okay, so for the area, and that's the main disadvantage of the classical method of giving the uniform hazard spectra, that not a single earthquake can fill all the frequency contents. So for this, I don't know how you will be defining the frequency content for some area. You have to do the seismic hazard assessment as an exercise.
Okay, again, there are a number of questions on the deterministic and probabilistic hazard assessment, but I have picked a few of them. First of all, which out of them is more conservative, and in Indian scenario, which one we should prefer using, especially for important structures?
I've told you that because the data is not available more than 100 years or so, sometimes it is only 60 years. Because after 1960, we have the worldwide network of seismographs. Before that, sometimes we go for collecting the data from different sources. So we are not confident enough to go for the prediction of ground motion for larger written periods. So a combination of these two approaches has to be used. For capping value, you have to go for deterministic seismic hazard assessment. And for design basis earthquake, you have to go for PSHE. So, I mean, a combination of these two is really required. You cannot do it using one approach, because using design basis earthquake from deterministic approach is also very empirical. I mean, doing half of it or considering the mean and mean plus sigma, that is not well justified sometimes. So you have to go for the, and engineers, what they require is the probabilistic values. They want the uncertainties into the data, and no uncertainties you can get from DSH. So a combination of both of these two has to be used.
Okay, though there are several questions, sir, because now we are out of time. So thank you so much for answering all our questions.
I'm here, and anybody can approach me, and I'm basically a teacher, so there's no problem.
Okay, thank you. I appeal all the participants to mark their attendance in next 5 minutes. The link has been already posted there. I take this opportunity to thank especially our today's distinguished speaker, Professor M.L. Sharma, for illuminating us on this very important topic in earthquake engineering. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
In last 1.5 hours. I also thank Professor Ravi Jakka and Professor Shivalsa for helping us in organizing this webinar, and eventually Professor T.G. Sitaram, who is the president of ISET. I'm glad that today there were more than 370 participants who eventually participated this, and we have registrations for even 10 different countries for today's webinar. So it is really a success story for conducting such kind of webinars by ISET, and I'm looking forward for the next webinars by another faculty members. So thank you one and all for joining this webinar, and we will see you again in the next ISET webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.